Hey, we're going to talk a little bit about music theory. I've studied music theory for quite a while. I actually set my musical studies aside when I got to a point that I was recording, and I really basically thought I understood music theory pretty well at that point. I had not done a lot of composing and things like that, and I purchased a DAW, and I started trying to record music. Well, I came to a very quick understanding that the DAW and audio engineering and music production, recording, mixing, and mastering was a whole nother art form that was very much intrinsically connected and working together with the compositional aspect in the music theory. So I'm kind of approaching it from that way because I actually had to set my composition and things like that aside to learn audio engineering and music production, and that's been going on now for 6 years. And, they're really interconnected. One of the first things that I want to say about that is that at this point that it is a compositional tool. It really, the audio engineering and the music mixing, recording, mixing, and mastering at this point, in my mind, that, that equipment, those tools, what all can be done in that is very much a compositional tool. And to understand everything that can happen there, all the aspects of recording, mixing, and mastering, all the ways that you can sculpt sound and do things to the audio as far as sculpting it, and the spatializations and so many different aspects of it that are very much part of a compositional tools that very much in my research and my study have become very pertinent in how I compose. I mean, it can completely change the entire way how I compose something. I mean, completely, and is very much part of the compositional tool, which is very difficult because if it's not in your hands like a pencil when you're writing music with your piano or your guitar, that a lot of things when you start messing around it's hard to notate some of those things as you're going through that. At least I have found that to be, because I have had to make up notations for things that I'm going to do that are intrinsic to the actual composition. So I kind of wanted to address that first before we're going to talk about some music theory. But I wanted to address that issue because that is basically another tool and part of music composition and music theory, in my opinion. And it's one of the reasons why I got into it so heavily, because I realized immediately that my stuff did not sound, like the stuff I was hearing on the radio when I started recording, even though I had a pretty good understanding of music and music theory. So, I obviously that wasn't getting it done. So, I started studying audio engineering and recording, mixing, and mastering music and acoustics. And that's been, like I said, been going on 6 years or longer. And, it's very much a part of it and another part of music theory, and to be taken into consideration just as most things in music theory. And that's my opinion and how I see it at this point, and how I seen it then, why I started studying it. So let's begin with, I want to kind of go back to when I was first starting studying music. Now, the understanding of it was, when I first started studying music theory, that it seems so complex, and the diversity of things that had to be studied to understand all the concepts to create music seemed to be overwhelming, and it wasn't until I had been studying music for about 4 years into my studying of theory that I come to the realization of how simple music theory is. It can be very complicated. It's just like I try to say when I'm talking about audio engineering or acoustics or anything else in the music production, that, all the simple concepts can be, expanded into very complex issues and complex structures. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But the way it was presented to me, that it was this huge complex structure that, I was like looking at it like, gee, that's, and then I got to perform this also while I'm learning the theory. And it seemed overwhelming. And after about 4 years of study, I realized that how simple it was. I thought, wait a minute, I've been studying all this stuff about music theory, and it really is all interconnected to a point into a much smaller simplicity that is, capable of becoming this much larger complexity. And that realization, it just basically it just blew the door open for me, because I had kept looking at music theory like it was this big, monster that I had to, go after. And it really wasn't. It was these basic outlines that can grow into these huge complexities. And I broke it down into the simpler aspects and concepts, and then started piecing those together into the more complex, concepts that were being presented me, that, it very much, like I said, it very much made me cross the line to where, I had reached a point where I was studying music theory. And then I knew that, it was like, it was about a 3 or 4 day, sit down and just trying to reevaluate, my studies. And in that 3 or 4 days, I came to the understanding that I understood music theory. It was like a revelation, and it was a really cool experience. I've had a lot of people that come to me and ask me about music theory, and anymore that I normally teach people that want to learn really basic things to sit around the campfire and have fun because I know what they want to do and that they don't want to become Bach or Beethoven. Or I'll teach people who want to be virtuosos, because those two people I can deal with very well and understand what they're reaching for. I've found a whole lot of other people anywhere in between that area can be very hard to teach, because they want to consume so much, but it's not applicable to what they want to do. I'll give you an example. I've got a guy that I taught for years, that, basically wanted to become like Joe Satriani. And then, he finally come to understanding he likes blues and stuff. And basically the whole concept of what he needs to understand theoretically and musically, was way simpler than the stuff he was trying to get a hold of. And it was like, it wasn't going to do him any good. I'm not going to say it wasn't going to do him any good, exactly, but those concepts and the things that he was reaching for were way out of context and way out of the realm of what he was trying to do with music. So that's a huge thing to understand, that, music can be very complex. You want to be like Beethoven or Bach or Paganini or Joe Satriani, or, I don't know, how many different musicians you could name that are virtuoso kind of players, and a whole lot of them can be, theoretical geniuses about understanding, actually composition and how music goes together, that have worked it out very well. But not everybody needs to understand music that well for what they want to do, and that's a huge thing to get a hold of. What do you want to do with music? How far do you need to take it to understand what you want to do? For me, it was the study. I love music and I love the guitar, but I'm a glutton, I love the study, I want to know it inside and out. So, that was a huge thing for me, just to get, to understand it. It was a beautiful thing, understanding everything that was going on in it. So, this initial video on this subject is kind of related to that, because I found that, some of the basics, it can get very complex. And, for me, music theory, when somebody asks me about music theory and they start getting all technical or going way back in time into the, different eras and all this, I immediately go, whoa, dude, that's, let's focus on the fundamentals of music. Okay. So, are you want to learn music theory for Western culture, the 12 tones, and you want to work out of that, right? That's where you're going with your theory. Okay, so let's focus on the fundamentals of that, because I had went about it the other way, and it was really painful, because I started out with the first beginner guitar book and then started trying to play Mary Had a Little Lamb, and it took a while before I finally realized that I wasn't learning what I wanted to learn, and I'm going to find some other way to learn music theory while I was learning. And I immediately started biting into big stuff like, Paganini and Bach and Beethoven. And, I couldn't play it at all, but I just jumped right into it and started, practicing until I could while I was studying my music theory. And some people say that's a little bit backwards way of going about it, but, for me, I knew that was what I had to do because that's where I was going anyway. Studying the fundamentals, understanding the theory behind it, and practicing what I wanted to play at the level that I wanted to play. And, I wanted to be able to sit down and pull out Paganini's 24 Caprices on my guitar and play them. And I did, it took a lot of practice, but, I got to the point that I could. But let's get right back to the fundamentals. Like I said, as I went through my studies, that, I'm hoping I'm going to put this short series together that I can really throw out these fundamentals for you to try to get a hold of and to research and to practice on and to repeat, and to learn, so to save yourself a whole lot of headache from having to really go through, all the years that I did of trying to understand what the heck was going on with music, when those fundamental concepts and the building of them and, the rules, when to apply the rules and when to throw the rules out the window, because that's very much part of music theory, whether anybody says so or not. There's a whole lot of times where some things I'm doing might be theoretical, but there'll be times where I'll stop thinking about it and I throw all the theory out the window and I just start trying to figure out where I'm going with this. Does that make sense? And and things like that. That's a compositional thing, but it can, it's very true. And I hate to say that and get in trouble from some theoretician, but it can be very true when you're composing, because sometimes, the feelings inside of you got nothing to do with the theory of what is supposed to work. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And that becomes very obvious as you listen to all kinds of different genres of music, so, my view of it and how I've come to understand music theory is how I'm going to relate it to you. Now, I wouldn't expect that there's might be a whole lot of things that you're going to see me just brush off that you might think, oh, why would you brush that off? That's very important. And I'd be like, well, I figured out that it wasn't that important and I wasn't going to spend the next 3 years, sitting on a wall like Albert Einstein trying to figure out some formula. Does that make sense? And when it got to that point, I had to sit back and reevaluate, because I didn't want music to mean that to me. I didn't want it to become that kind of a thing, which it did for a while until I finally caught it. And I was like, wait a minute, this is not what I'm trying to do with music. This doesn't feel anything like what I was trying to do. It feels more like science than music. And I had to come to some understanding of how those two are going to go together and at what level for me to come to some understanding of music theory to where it was applicable and, functional as far as I could understand, and was very, usable and not as, break it down into smaller concepts that can grow into larger complexities, but not always have it this big complex thing that I have to worry about and think about all the time. And it was a huge, revelation. So, when you're talking about music, there's lots of things, even on Wikipedia. You go ahead and get on here and just the fundamentals. Pitch, pitch is a fundamental, scales and modes, consonance and dissonance, rhythm, melody, chords, harmony, timbre, dynamics, articulations, texture, form and structure, analysis, music perception and cognition, expression, genre and techniques, mathematics, serial composition and set theory, musical semiotics, notation. All these kind of things are going to be very pertinent in the musical theory, but I'm going to try to set this in a way to where it's smaller structures to build complexities rather than music theory is this big complex thing you have to deal with, because you're going to make a decision how complex you're going to make it when you decide what you're going to do with the theory, and that will come as you study and learn. So I hope that was a good introduction, and we're going to Go on with the study, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace, hope, love.